for those of you who don't know me, I'm a real estate professional licensed in New Jersey with partners nationwide and globally. We are offering this workshop today in partnership with ECMA, the Ethiopian Community Mutual Association organization, which helps and supports the Ethiopian community in the New York, New Jersey area, although this workshop is for any homeowner in our area. And so I think the first thing we'd want to let you know is that this workshop will be recorded, and we do plan to share out onto Facebook pages. So just to give you that disclosure, so if you would like to go off camera or anything else, feel free to do that. So we got some folks from New Jersey, mostly from West Orange. So I'll quickly go through the process of selling a home, particularly focusing in New Jersey. And then you're welcome to ask questions. I would probably hold off questions at the end because it will likely get answered throughout, right, the presentation. And I just ask that you keep yourself on mute unless you have a question, and maybe you can jot that in the chat, because we're all kind of working from home and we may have kids or pets and other noise in the background. What else do I want to tell you? So I will deliver on what I promised when you registered. So essentially talking about the entire selling process in New Jersey, but also talking about the strategies of the sell buy, right? And so what I found in my informal survey is that there is, I think we all know by now that we have such a tight inventory in real estate. There's not enough homes on the market to meet the buyer's needs. And there's several factors for that. But there's something interesting I found, and this is sort of the inspiration for this workshop, is there are actually homes, people are ready to move and raising their hands, but they're afraid to put the property on the market because they're afraid they're not going to find their next home. Right? So this is going to give you some strategies to think about to hopefully get the conversation moving into, oh, okay, so I have these options that I can consider to minimize risk and maximize my opportunity to land my next home so that I can make the move, so that I can capitalize on this market, right? So that is the goal. How does that sound? Let me know what questions that you have that you'd like to make sure that I address for you in the chat. I have my outline here, but I want to make sure that you walk away with what you came here to get. So please tell me if there's a burning question for you that you've been kind of thinking about, drop them in the chat so I can make sure that I cover that, okay? So this is a little bit about me. Just the presentation is about you mostly, but just so you know what you can expect and who I am. So I come from the corporate world with 12 years of experience. I am a mom, very active in my community. Most of you may already know me. And I'm also active in the PTA world, which is important. A lot of the questions we get in our industry is how's the school system, right? So beyond the number ratings that we see online, it's important to be able to talk through how those numbers are arrived at and what's really important to look and kind of really peel the onion behind those numbers. I'm a homeowner. And so I think that should be one word. So a lot of my experience and how I approach business is very much informed from how I became a homeowner. I got into the industry as a result of my own home buying experience. And these are all cool sort of credentials that will make sense later as we talk about, okay? Okay, so we talked about some of the expectations today. How do you prepare? Considerations for COVID. And so just like any other industry, we have to pivot into, how do we serve our clients safely? And there's definitely some changes that have happened to make sure that both professionals, buyers, and sellers are safe. The team of people you'll need, depending on if you've sold a home before or if you've sold a home in the state of New Jersey, the process is a little bit different. Some strategies to implement to maximize the dollars for you, some do's and don'ts, and then any questions that you have answered. Let me just pop in the chat to see if there were anything. Okay, so here is what's going to matter when you sell a home, right? The location matters, because we often make decisions on where to buy a home depending on where we live, where we work, if we have kids, school systems, our support system, right? Friends and family and things like that. The condition matters, especially if your buyer is a first-time home buyer. That will matter because they will want to know that they don't have to do a lot of work, right? And also, I mean, if two homes are in the same location, similar sort of, let's say 3-bedroom, 2-bath, if one is more updated, if the homeowner has invested in the home, then it's going to value higher than someone perhaps they haven't, because the cost of ownership is going to be lower for something that's updated, right? And we'll touch on new construction as well. That's another thing to consider in the current market. The marketing matters, even in the current market where there is very low inventory. The marketing does matter because you're still in competition with, the few homes that are out there. The market condition. Now that is huge, and that's been a driving force for a lot of the shifts and movements that we're seeing now. Beyond the market condition, what drives the market condition, right? And so, a year ago, if you ask any real estate professional, hey, what's the market like now or tomorrow, a week or a month later, no real estate economic person could really tell you what was going to happen, because we're dealing with a pandemic and global forces. And the market, by the way, is the collective behavior of every single one of us, right? When I decide to make a move, when you decide to make a move, that collective power creates the market, the pattern, right? And so we have definitely seen, especially in the state of New Jersey, an influx of buyers coming from the New York area. We've always had that, by the way, that's nothing new. So this migration, as we call it, from New York area has always happened, when people start their family or they want a little bit more space and outdoor and land or parking. That's what a lot of my buyers tell me. I just need parking. I can't be looking for parking, right? But the pandemic has certainly exasperated that, and it has created a sense of urgency for those who may be thinking about it to do it sooner. And so it's a combination of that, and it's a combination of interest rates being low, and some folks perhaps holding off because of COVID. Maybe they're not comfortable having people in their homes and holding off putting the property on the market. That has created a really pent-up demand. And low inventory, right? And then the pricing strategy, which is a really interesting one in today's world. We typically look at, the last 6 months or so of purchase sold history to come up with a pricing strategy to sell a home. I'm looking at the last 3 months. It may even be the last month, because things are changing very quickly. And what buyers are considering valuable things may change, right? So in the past, and buyers now are very savvy. I mean, they join local Facebook groups, and even though they're represented by an agent, which I love, they're active, they're engaged in the process. And they ask, hey, how is the school in the system? And do they have this program? Or, a year ago or 2 years ago, people were very particular in the style of homes they were looking for, the Victorian and the colonial. Now I find that it's more functional. Like, I just need a 3-bed, 2-bath that's functioning, right? And so, which also helps drive sort of a sense of value and market value and appraised value, right? So this is sort of the factors that matter when you're considering selling a home. And sometimes one will weigh heavily than the other. And in our case, market condition is certainly what's going to weigh the heaviest here. So we'll dive a little bit about each of these, right? So the location, obviously, the look and feel, the neighborhood, people drive around, and that's when I'm representing buyers. I represent both buyers and sellers. That's something I tell them is, when it's nice outside, like today, definitely, take the car out for a ride with your family and drive around the towns that you're considering. It is a good investment of time, right? It's not wasted time to drive around and look at the neighborhood. If there happen to be open houses, which we still can do, as of now, we weren't able to do earlier on in the pandemic. Open house has actually become a very important marketing tool. I'll talk a little bit about that later in the context of COVID. And then the school system for those who have kids is huge. And so that's, the location, we can talk about condition of a home, but you can't change where the location is, right? Transportation, access to New York is something that a lot of people, just about every buyer I'm working with is looking for, even if they didn't come from New York, the ability to kind of get in and out. Maybe they have friends and family or they've worked there. Walkability, depending on who the client is, it's certainly nice to be able to get to the bakery shop or the park in close proximity, and property taxes, right? So New Jersey is known for having one of the higher property taxes, and I often get that comment that New Jersey is expensive, and I say yes, and right? It's yes, and what does it offer? What do we get for that? So we have other states who don't have income tax, for example, but you're also thinking about what else? So what does a state that has high property taxes offer to its residents versus not? So I think it's always about a value prop of what makes sense. So this is why location matters. The condition, I think most of us know that the newer something is, the less a home buyer has to worry about it, right? And primarily, and this is going to be one of the strategies I'll talk about if you're considering selling and buying, is sometimes I get calls from clients to say, hey, Tez, what do I need to do in order to sell this property, in order to maintain the value, or maybe get a little bit higher for it? It all depends. The conversation I've been having with my sellers a year ago is very different from the conversations that I'm having with them now, right? Because inventory is so low, you may not have to do much for your property to compete, right? It still has to be presentable, it still has to be safe, it still has to be solid. But if you were thinking about redoing the kitchen and selling it right away, we then need to talk about the ROI that you're going to get from that, right? If you were thinking about staying in the home for a couple of years, then there's that value of enjoyment for you. You're not doing it to resell, right? And so what I find is most people are interested in settling in a home in a great location. If they have kids with good school system that's safe, then say the most updated one in the current environment, which makes this market really attractive for sellers to sell without having to do much to it, right? The idea of competing with the current property on the market is it's still there, but less intense because the demand is so high, right? So I won't spend much time here. There's a lot of things you can do that are not sort of capital improvements or that don't require a lot of cash that make the home really competitive. Power washing the exterior, for example, right? If you're in a single family home, changing out the fixtures. So if you change out the lighting, if you change out the sink, the vanity, or even handles of things in the kitchen, they're really the chandeliers in the dining room. These are, sort of low cost, high return, because it's what a buyer kind of notices right away. It complements the home really well. And so I'm happy to have, more dialogue about this for those who are interested one-on-one, but the condition does matter. Just know that in the current market, you may not be expected to do a whole lot to it, right? Marketing matters. Even in a hot market, marketing matters because we want to reach as many people as possible who could be potential good fit for your home. And digital marketing is even more important now because a lot of people are looking at photo or video online, and it's really important to have professional photography. Sometimes I see on listings pictures that were taken by a phone and I can tell right away it really is not doing that home justice. It really does not show how beautiful, how spacious something is if it's not done professionally with wide lens, right? And even community groups, right? The Zillows and the Redfins and the Realtors, all of those are great. But often, aren't we looking out for our families and friends? We want to bring them closer to us, right? And especially in the current market where inventory is tight, we want to market in local community groups so that our neighbors can say, hey, the house down the street is for sale, or I want my friend to be close to me. And so those sort of local niche community marketing strategies are really important as well. Professional groups for us is also important. We're all working really hard to find inventory for our clients. And so sometimes we share that, hey, I may have something coming up in the market. And so just to say that the idea of marketing does not go away because it's a hard market. There's still work to be done there. So what is the market condition? Usually I have graphs in numbers here. The only way I can say is hot. The year over year, right? The number of property or inventory that's available for sale is down significantly. However, the number of people who are getting pre-approved for mortgage is up significantly. And this is for two factors that I mentioned in the beginning, right? Number one, this sort of urban flight that's happening from the surrounding areas. Number two, because interest rates are low, right? So when interest rates are low, someone who may qualify for a $400,000 home, for example, when the interest rate goes down by 0.5% or a percentage, they can now qualify for 450 or maybe 5, depending on their DTI or the debt to income ratio. So with the same income and same credit score and same reserves, they can afford more of a home, right? And so that's sort of the market condition. There's not a lot of homes on the market. And what's happening is when we talk about condition, because of COVID, a lot of us are working from home, right? This is my home office. And a lot of companies are planning to continue that way, at least if not permanently. They may ask their employees to come in maybe 2 days a week or something like that. So now there is this level of flexibility that now exists that did not exist before, right? So, okay, so if I only have to go to the office 2 days a week, I can live further, right? Because I'm only going to commute 2 days a week. Or if I can work from home or virtually permanently, do I need to even be in the same state or even the same country for that matter? I know people who are working internationally, right? And so all these different levels of flexibility become possible that they were not possible before, right? And so even virtual learning is something that makes it interesting, because before, when our kids went to school, physically, you can't just, that was the whole spring market. If you've heard of the real estate spring market, a lot of that was driven from sorry, I got distracted. Kids being physically in the school. And so, we don't want our kids to stop, going to the school and then start going somewhere else, the social emotional aspect. I think the virtual world makes that somewhat fluid, right? It may not be perfect, but it's a less traumatic, let's say, if you need to change school, during the year, because we're sort of in front of the screen. There's not that physical, social, emotional aspect versus if we had to do it. And I think most districts, depending on when you move, will allow you to kind of complete out the year in that same school district. So there's all these, working from home, virtual learning, all these elements that maybe were not, did not exist for most of us before that now exist, right? So hopefully that, maybe you were already thinking, about this, and, that will give you some sort of solidarity that a lot of people are thinking about this and have done it. So pricing, as we talked about, is affected by location, number of homes competing, pending sales. And so when I help clients strategize for pricing to bring a home to the market, we talk about not only what's sold, but what is on the market right now that's a competition to this subject home. And by the way, what went under contract, right? If something went under contract in a matter of days, that typically is a telltale sign that the market is hot. People are not, playing with their time. And that's essentially what happens between something going on the market and something going under contract. We're talking about days, right? It's no longer 30, 60 months. In fact, a lot of my New York buyers, I tell them, if you can't get out here to see it, I offer kind of video tours. And then that could be complemented by, and this is something you can use as well if you're kind of just thinking about selling and buying, depending on where you're buying. If you can't physically be there as soon as properties come on the market, you can ask your agent to do a virtual tour for you. And then you can complement the external, the vibe, sort of the drive-by, with what I call the digital drive-by, right? You can do the Bing or the Google Maps to get a feel for the area. and kind of put those two together to see if you're comfortable kind of making a decision. And there's a lot of people who are making offers sight unseen using these digital tools because it's that hot. I will say that sentimental value, it has a lot of value for us as homeowners and the memories we've made. It unfortunately does not hold any value when it comes to the market, right? What buyers see is how well a home has been maintained, how well it fits their needs, not so much the sentimental value. And so when you make upgrades as well, that's really important to keep in mind. And I love when sellers reach out to me ahead, even if they're not ready to sell, right? I had a conversation the other day with a homeowner to say, hey, Des, we're renovating our bathrooms. And I want to know, if I take out the tub in one of the bathrooms and make it like a stall, will that impact pricing? And I love when people think strategically like that. This person has no intention of selling her home in the near future. And we had to talk about, okay, which bathroom is this? Is there another tub in the home? If this is the hallway bathroom where, kids would use, for example, then you want to have a tub, right? Parents need to bathe their kids in a tub. It's tough to do that in a standing stall. And so kind of just, these strategic things to keep in mind. So I do have to throw this out there that when we make upgrades, we may make it to our taste and we may, pay a pretty penny for it, but just keep in mind that when you're comparing one product to another, if there's another home next to you, similar size and condition, and maybe the bathroom or the kitchen is a little bit different, is the buyer willing to pay that much more for your home because it's so specialized? Because anyone who's buying a home would expect the home to have a kitchen or would expect the home to have a bathroom, right? It's how much value is yours based on what value the buyer sees, right? So that's really important to keep in mind. So this is the seller journey in short. And so typically when we work with sellers, when I work with sellers, I go and take a look at the home. I offer sort of what I call property enhancement suggestions. So there's a checklist that I use, and this could be a combination of, quite honestly, decluttering. That is the best thing you can do for yourself right now, regardless of if you're thinking about selling or not. Because what I find is that people may actually miss out on a really hot market because they're overwhelmed with how much stuff they have in their home, right? We have to account for every bobby pin in the house, as I call it, when we move. That's how we know really how much stuff we have, right? And so those of you who are local to me in West Orange, you know that we have, and if you're on Facebook, depending on how you find out about this workshop, we have a group called Buy Nothing West Orange. It's a Facebook platform. It's where you get to offer gifts or items from your home for your neighbors to come and use. It's been an amazing platform where we're forming and building community above and beyond exchanging, the items. Of course, you have your local swaps, or there's other organizations who come and pick up, the Pick Up Please and the Lupus Foundation and all of this. So I would really, really encourage you to attack, if you think nothing away from today, go with the motivation of attacking, that drawer or that cabinet that always has stuff falling down on you, or that closet. It really will make a difference, and it'll make things easier for your transition, right? So think about, everything that you're keeping has to be stuff you're willing to keep for the next home, right? So we go through that, and if there's anything that needs to be repaired that could potentially be an inspection issue, we want to take care of that ahead of time, so we're not wasting time during the transaction. And then the market analysis is a lot of what I already talked about. So taking a look at the current market, the trend. And so sometimes we may have to price ahead of the market, right? Depending on if there's quick shifts happening. And then kind of looking at the comparative homes, or what we call comps, in the area. And then coming up with, an idea, a range of, this is, a market value that buyers will find valuable, right? And agreeing with that with homeowners. So a lot of the times, I think homeowners expect this magic number out of realtors of, what's the price of my home? What if I told you that if you were going to hire 2 different appraisers to come and appraise your home at different times, guaranteed they will come back with a different number, right? So real estate is not an exact science. There's no magic number. It's all about what is the buyers willing to pay in the market that you're in, right? So this is sort of a co-creation process with the home buyers. I present the data and we come up with what we think is a fair price depending on the market and the shift that's happening. And then we come up with a marketing plan, right? So the marketing is still important, even in the hot market. And digital is a big piece of that, and letting neighbors know is a big piece of that. There's usually postcards that get sent to neighbors as well. Communication is really huge. So when you're thinking about buying or selling, that should be one of your questions you ask agents is, what is your communication plan? What can I expect to hear from you? I typically like to have sort of a weekly check-in with my clients, even if there's nothing going on. But this is, what I'm doing for you, and there is nothing going on, right? Just so everyone is sort of on the same page. I like to have, if I'm working with a couple or partners, more than one person, I like to have a group text or group email just so everyone is on the same page. And a consultation, right? So I don't take on clients without having consultations and aligning on expectations of process, communication, and things like that. And then we agreed on a date, to make it go live. So I think what's different about this market is I've been talking to people who say, Tez, like, I'm ready to move, but like I'm not ready for the whole fireworks of having to leave, every couple of hours for the showings, and I have dogs and I have kids and have virtual learning. I'm working from home. And so how our industry has shifted is, in the past, we had something called broker open houses, where we market the home that we're selling to other agents first, so that they can then bring their clients, right? So obviously a lot of us are working from home and we have kids learning from home. So that's not really happening, at least in the state of New Jersey. And not so much by law, but by design, because most of us are home during the day, right? But what we are doing strategically is typically homes go on the market, say mid to late week, like say a Thursday. And then depending on the client's needs, we can either make take personal appointments that Friday, or it goes live on Thursday, and the first showing would be on Saturday. That may be an open house as well, right? I can tell you that in the current market, you can pretty much expect to get an offer from that open house and not have to show individual appointments, if that is your need, right? Obviously, we want to make it available to as many buyers as possible to have, the widest reach. But that is my strategy and solution for those who say, I have dogs, I have kids, I can't be like leaving every, 2 hours. Is the market can actually demand that showing is on these days, and that's it. And we will expect an offer on, the following few days. So hopefully that gives people a peace of mind that you don't have to, you're not expected to have a perfect full home for months on end. And then obviously, there's the negotiating piece that happens. You can expect to get more than one offer in the current market. Now, listen, the market is hot, but things still have to be priced fairly and according to market, right? So the market may be detecting here, we can't be over here, because what happens is the property will sit on the market for a while, and then it'll lose its value. Even though there's nothing wrong with it, people will start to think that there is something wrong with it, and you're going to get lower than what you would have gotten if it was priced up to the market, right? So that's still an important piece. So I typically actually have a spreadsheet that I use to kind of gather all the data from all the offers and present that in an objective manner to my clients of, here is, the offer price, here are the terms, and the terms are just as important, by the way, as the offer price. And here's what you need to know about as a seller. Everyone wants a high number, but everyone wants a high number as a selling price. What's important is when you decide to accept that high offer, you need to make sure that that buyer is solid, that they're pre-approved. I typically call the mortgage companies of all the people who are putting in offer to make sure that they are truly pre-approved. I don't take the document as is. And that they have the funds. And so what happens in the current market is people would bid so high that there can be an appraisal disparity, right? And so between the price they're offering and what the appraised value is coming back, there could be a difference. And you need to know that depending on how the offer is structured, in New Jersey, we have what's called attorney review, right? After you accepted a contract, we go into an attorney review period where each party retains an attorney, goes back and forth and kind of finalizes some of the fine prints. Some buyers are choosing to waive appraisals. It depends on the price point, and it depends on, I think, the range where it makes sense. That's how tight the market is. Some people may choose to waive inspections. I always recommend that people do their inspections. Now, whether you use that for informational purposes versus negotiating purposes, meaning asking for repairs, is something different. It all depends on your risk appetite, depends on if you're an experienced homeowner. But there are buyers who are waiving appraisals. We're not going to talk about if that's good practice or not, because it just depends on each of the buyer and their risk appetite. But what I can tell you as a seller, to make sure that if they do have that clause in there, that you want to make sure they have the capital to do so, right? That you're doing your due diligence to make sure that they can cover, because the last thing you want to do is, accept that offer, take your property off the market, and then come to, should there be a variation in a variance in appraisal, that they can't meet that gap, right? And then, we kind of hopefully go through closing without a hump. In my practice, I do have something called the Client Appreciation Program, where even after closing, that is not the end of sort of my relationship with my clients. I continue to provide value personally and professionally. And I also have a give back piece of my business, where for every closing that happens, there's a portion of the professional fee services that go into a charity of your choice. So that's a cool feature. I know I said a lot here, so please write down your questions and I'll be able to address them. This is the buying process. I'll pass this real quick because I do have some specific strategies for you for the current market that I think you'll find interesting, and this should be the last slide. So the open house strategy I talked about, right? So in the current market, if you are, a family that maybe individual showings over weeks and weeks is not your thing currently, there is a strategy to make a home live on a certain day and then have open house, and you can almost always expect an offer out of that. So that's great. The showing strategy. So for individual showings, there's instructions that we set, we communicate with other agents in terms of, how long the family can be in a home. So typically I say an agent and then 2 other decision makers. So we don't need to bring on, uncle, aunt, grandma, and all of that for showing to minimize risk, right? And then 15-minute increments. So 15 minutes, you should have enough time to go look at a property. If you need to have discussions about, your interest in that property or whatever, do that outside, right? And then there's, masks, of course, and then we typically put booties by the door. And so there's things that we do, and maybe we can even have, time in between showings to make sure that it's safe as possible. And then the homeowner can kind of sanitize, high touch areas, right? The doors, the cabinets and stuff like that, the light switch. There's something called legal plans that you may or may not know about. So this is something typically through work that gets offered that will save you some dollars on your closing costs for lawyers. And so it's a program that you opt into. You pay a small monthly fee, and then you can, it's much like doctors and dentists. You pop in the zip code that you're in or you're planning to buy in, and then it'll give you a list of attorneys. I typically ask that my clients send me that list so I can let them know if I've worked with any of the attorneys and that I would recommend. So this saves you, an average $1,200-1,500 in New Jersey. So whether you're selling or buying, definitely take a look at it. It also helps, I believe, with wills and trusts and traffic violations and stuff like that. So a cool little strategy here. So here is sort of, I think, where most of you came to listen, right, for the most part. And I took some notes here. I was talking to a few mortgage professionals this week in preparation for this workshop. So if you see me looking this way, I'm looking at my notes. So when you have a property to sell, but you're also buying and you're concerned about finding inventory for the buy, here are some strategies you can implement. You might want to write this down. So first, see if you can get pre-approved for the new property without the assets of the current property. In essence, can you carry 2 mortgages, right? So most of us may have gotten pre-approved for yay amount when we bought the current home we're in, but we might have bought here. And so we're not really, our debt to income ratio is not as high as it could be. So if you're able to do that, Find out what your buying power is currently, especially if you're moving down, if you're sizing down or downsizing, right? If you're buying a smaller home, you may very well qualify. Sometimes I find that clients who are in a home now, if they're couple or partners or family, maybe it was bought under one person and the other person came into the family, right? So that means the financial burden, if you will, is under one person. So see if the other person can get qualified with their income and credit and debt to income. If that's the case, here's what you do. You know that in the current market, based on what we talked about today, it's a hot market. Your home is more than likely to sell unless there's some foundational issues or something like that. And even that is something to be remedied for. Everything has a fix, right? So then what I would recommend is you can make, when you're looking for a property, and we can talk about even how to be strategic about finding those properties. You don't need to make your current home a contingency, meaning you don't need to say, I need to sell this home to buy that home, because you know it's going to sell, right? So that makes your offer on the buy stronger, because obviously home sellers want to accept an offer with as little contingency and as little risk as possible, right? So you can make that one-way contingency, as I call it, on your sell, that when you're selling, you can make a contingency to your buyer that I need to sell this home. So what that does is it gives you a peace of mind that you're not going to be homeless, right? You're not going to be forced to sell this property if you don't find the other one, because you have the contingency on your sell, but you don't have a contingency on the buy, which makes your offer competitive. I hope that makes sense. So that's one of my strategies. The other is, we've had this in practice even before COVID, but it has become even more important now during COVID, is the idea of rent back. So in the offer, and a lot of buyers are actually even being proactive about offering this contingency to make their offer more attractive, is you can sell the home in the event that you don't find a home. That's if you don't have, the contingency that you need to find something else. You can have a language there of renting back from the owners, from the new owners, right? So that way, if kids need to finish school, or if you need a couple more months to find a home, you still have that extra time, but you still have maximized on the current market. You still have closed. You now become a tenant to the new buyers, and you can agree on the terms there. So I don't know how many of you know that, but that is totally an acceptable practice. A lot of people are actually thinking about, it all depends on, again, your family dynamics and what different moving parts you have, but I'm just going to throw them all out there for your consideration. Some people are considering short-term rentals, or just renting for a year, and then they'll buy something later. We don't know what the market is going to do in a year. And so they said, you know what, I want to get my equity out of the current home because it's such a hot market. I'll figure out, I'm going to minimize, I'll give away my stuff, I'll sell my stuff, I'll put it in storage, whatever I have to do, and then I can buy in a year. But I just want to take advantage of this market. That's an option. So it could be an Airbnb, it could be a short term, it could be a 1-year lease, or maybe like if you have family members that have, I don't know, an in-law suite or something like that. One of my sellers recently sold her home, and she's building a new construction in another state, which is one of the strategies I'll talk to you about. But because of COVID and lumber and all of that, the construction was delayed. Luckily, we had this, heart conversation before I took her on as a client. So perfect world, everything aligns. Worst case, it doesn't. So what happens if it doesn't, right? And we already had to talk through these options. And so she was able to move into, her family's home for a couple months until the new construction is complete. Again, this may not be comfortable for everyone, but I'm just throwing out some options, and hopefully it'll get your creative juices flowing. So we talked about Airbnb short-term, potentially storage if you're moving into a smaller unit. Because guess what? The margin you're going to get now by selling it in this market will more than likely pay for whatever storage or rent or whatever fees you're going to have, right? Off-market properties. That's really, remember earlier on, I said I've been in conversations with clients who want to sell but are worried about finding the next home. So the conversation I'm having with them is, I understand that. Would you be open to, though, buyers coming in and looking at your property because there's so little inventory that we have to be creative to find buyers' inventory. What I find is a lot of people are open to that, right? They just don't like the idea of officially being on the market and buyers coming revolving through the door and the stress of finding the next thing. And if a buyer comes through and likes their home, I think that may give them incentive maybe to look for, you know, the next home, right? And you can do the same approach on the buy side, depending on the professional you're working with and which area you're working with. Ask, do you have, you know, exclusive listings or something that are coming onto the market? You'd be surprised. Some people like what's called a quiet sale. They don't want a sign on the door. They don't want their neighbors to know that they're moving. They don't want it to be on the MLS. They just want to quietly just move, right? And so I'm finding that there's these opportunities in this market that could possibly happen. So those are important conversations to happen. We talked about open house. Buying somewhere else. So we talked about, depending on where your support system is, maybe you can buy in a different market that's not as competitive. And by the way, think also about new construction, right? So if you're only thinking about resales or homes that are already existing, think about new construction. It'll have some lead time depending on where in the process the new construction is. Is it, you know, framing, already built, about to be built? But at least you know that it's less competitive than, because not everyone is looking for new construction. People are normally looking for something they can move right in. So it's less competitive than the resales. And in most cases, you may be able to build a home to your liking, as opposed to buying something and knocking a wall down. So that's something to consider as well. Now, I will say you do need to be flexible with timing there, just with, you know, COVID and, you know, lumber and all of that. There may be, you know, movements happening within when a home is expected to be completed and you'll be able to close. But if you have appetite for that, definitely something to consider. 401k is something else that you may be able to leverage, right? So if you're getting pre-approved for the next home, but maybe you don't have, you may be able to get pre-approved from an income and credit perspective, but maybe you don't have the funds for the down payment, look to see if you can leverage your 401k to get the down payment, right? What I will say is I would encourage you to check to make sure that, let's say you're thinking about career changes or moving on from the company or anything like that, do ask what that will look like. So I actually took advantage of that years ago when we bought this home. I knew that I wasn't going to stay in corporate back then, right? And so I said, hey, say I terminate my relationship with this employer, what happens? What's the payment agreements, right? My particular plan happens to have an option where I can continue to pay every 2 weeks just as if I was still employed. I would just now attach it to my checking account as opposed to it coming out of my paycheck. Some plans expect you to pay everything in lump sum when you separate from a company. So I will have that caveat there, but it's a resource that a lot of people may not know about, and it's something that can potentially give you an edge in competition. Okay, so I think that may be, let me take a break. Yeah, and then obviously, I mean, if you're a cash buyer, cash is king, right? So that might be something you want to do. Those are all the strategies that I wanted to share with you. I will now open it up for questions. This is also where you can find me on social media, so feel free to unmute yourself or drop your questions in the chat and I'll be sure to address them. Was that helpful? Did you learn something new? Yeah, so Honyan, the short answer is yes to your question. Definitely a good idea to engage an agent that specializes in that type of real estate in that market. Bruce, okay, I'm so glad you got something out of it. Tell me, what did you learn something new? Like, please tell me that, oh, I didn't know this existed. I didn't think about that, right? And at this point, you know what, Hannah, maybe we can stop sharing onto the social media and maybe even stop